The fire is almost gone. You feel it in your hands before your eyes ever notice the glow fading. The coal doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps, finds the gap between your shoulder and the ground, the bare skin at your ankle, the back of your neck, where heat slips away fastest. For most of human history, this was the most dangerous moment of the day. Not the hunt, not the predator circling somewhere in the dark, the night itself. Today, you solve all of this with a number on a wall. You set it to 68 degrees and forget the problem exists. Your ancestors could not forget. For them, a cold night wasn't uncomfortable. It was a question of whether they would wake up at all. So how did they survive it? Not for one night, but for hundreds of thousands of them. In caves and on open plains, through ice ages and frozen winters, long before blankets, walls, or warmth you could buy. The answer is stranger than you think. And some of it is still inside you. Start with the obvious one, fire. You already know early humans had fire, but look at how far back it goes. In a place called Wonderwork Cave, deep in South Africa, a researcher named Francesco Berna found something remarkable. Ash, burned bone, scorched plant material, sitting roughly 30 meters inside the cave, far from any entrance where a lightning strike could ever reach. The date on it was almost unbelievable. 1 million years old. That means a human ancestor was deliberately bringing fire into a sheltered space, tending it, keeping it alive 1 million years ago. Not only to cook, to survive the dark, to survive the cold. But here's what people forget about fire. A fire is not a blanket. It heats one side of you while the other side freezes. It burns down to embers in the deepest, coldest hours, exactly when you need it most. And someone has to feed it. All night, every night. Which leads to a quiet truth most people miss. Fire alone was never enough. So what filled the gap? The second answer is something you are wearing right now. Clothing. And the story of when humans first put it on is one of the strangest detective stories in all of science. Because clothing rots. Animal hides, plant fibers, fur, none of it survives 100,000 years buried in the ground. So for a long time, no one could say when humans first started covering their skin. Then scientists looked at lice. Stay with this. You carry two kinds of lice on your body. One lives in your hair, the other, the body louse, lives only in clothing. It evolved to cling to fabric instead of skin, which means the body louse could not have existed until humans had clothing for it to live in. A geneticist named Mark Stoneking realized something clever. If you could measure how long ago those two kinds of lice split apart, you could date the invention of clothing itself. His team studied the DNA. The answer came back somewhere around 170,000 years ago, possibly even more. Think about what that means. Long before cities, before farming, before a single written word, your ancestors had already wrapped themselves against the cold. The lice in their clothes were keeping a record they never meant to leave behind. But draping a hide over your shoulders is one thing. The real test came at night, when you lay down on cold, hard ground that pulled the heat straight out of your body. So what did you sleep on? For the answer, go to a rock shelter called Sibudu, also in South Africa, and the work of an archaeologist named Lynn Wadley. What she found there changes how you picture an ancient bed. Layers of plant material compressed into bedding, going back 77,000 years. Sedges and rushes gathered and piled to lift the sleeper up off the cold floor. And then the detail that stops you. The top layer was made from the leaves of a specific tree, a kind of wild quince. Those leaves contain natural chemicals that kill insects. In plain terms, your ancestors were laying down a mattress with built-in bug repellent 77,000 years ago. It gets better. Wadley found that the bedding was sometimes burned, set alight on purpose right where it lay, to clean it, to destroy pests and the mess of living, and then rebuilt fresh on top of the ash. This wasn't a careless pile of leaves. This was engineering. This was a people who had thought hard about the simple, brutal problem of how to lie down at night and not be bitten, not be eaten, and not freeze. And Sibudu wasn't even the oldest. At another site called Border Cave, Wadley and her colleagues found grass bedding laid down on layers of ash, going back 200,000 years. 200,000. People were making beds before our species had spread across a single continent. But there's one more piece to this, and it's the one that opened up the whole frozen world. Because there's a difference between a hide thrown loosely over your back and clothing that is cut and sewn to fit you. A loose hide lets cold air leak in at every edge. A fitted layer, stitched closed, traps a thin pocket of warm air right against your skin and holds it there. That trapped air is the real secret of staying warm. To sew that kind of clothing, you need a needle. And around 40 to 50,000 years ago, eyed needles carved from bone start showing up in the record, including in a famous site called Denisova Cave. The researcher Ian Gilligan has argued that this leap, from simply draping fur to tailoring it tight against the body, is part of what finally let humans push into the freezing north, into Ice Age Europe and Siberia, places that would have killed a naked body in a single night. So now let's reconstruct it. Let's build one cold night from the ground up, the way your ancestor actually lived it. The sun is gone. The temperature is dropping fast, the way it always does the moment the light leaves. You are inside a rock shelter. You're back to the stone, because stone at your back is one less direction the cold can come from. In front of you, the fire. You and the others gathered wood all through the day because a fire that dies at midnight is a threat, not a comfort. Beneath you, a thick bed of sedge stems, topped with those bitter, insect-killing leaves. Over your body, a hide, scraped and worked soft, maybe stitched to another with a needle of bone. And around you, the others. This is the part that matters most. Because here's the counterintuitive twist, the thing almost no one expects. The single most powerful technology your ancestors had for surviving a cold night was not fire. It was not clothing. It was not even the shelter over their heads. It was each other. A human body throws off heat constantly, roughly the warmth of a small lamp left burning all night. Pack several bodies together under shared hides, and you create a pocket of warm air that no single person could ever hold alone. Your ancestors slept in piles, children in the middle, where it was warmest. Adults on the outside, taking the cold so the young ones would live until morning. And someone always stayed half awake to feed the fire. Think about what that means. To survive the night, you could not be alone. The cold turned closeness into a matter of life and death. The person lying beside you wasn't just company. They were the reason your heart was still beating at dawn. Trust wasn't a feeling, it was insulation. This is why the lone survivor, the rugged individual against the wilderness, is mostly a myth. A single human, exposed in the cold dark, is a fragile, dying thing. A group of humans sharing fire and heat and watch shifts through the night is one of the most unstoppable forces this planet has ever produced. You are descended from the ones who stayed close, and this is where it reaches forward and touches you tonight. Because you have won, completely. You have a fire that never dies. It hums quietly inside the walls and the vents, in a box you never have to feed. You have clothing spun by machines, bedding softer than any leaf. A room held at a temperature your ancestors could not have imagined surviving in comfort. You have solved the cold so thoroughly that you never even think about it. But notice how you sleep now. Behind a locked door, in a sealed room. Very often entirely alone. The pile is gone. The shared warmth is gone. The body beside you, the one that once meant survival, is now optional, a preference, not a necessity. And yet something in you still remembers. It's why a cold, empty bed feels lonely in a way you can't quite put into words. It's why you sleep deeper and feel safer with someone breathing beside you. It's why a frightened child in the dark will cross an entire warm house just to crawl in next to a parent. That isn't weakness. That is 100,000 cold nights written into your nervous system, still whispering the oldest truth your species knows. You are safer when you are not alone. So tonight, the fire won't go out. You will lie down in a warmth your ancestors fought their whole lives to reach, and you will sleep without once feeling the cold come searching for the back of your neck. But some part of you, in the dark, will still listen for the breathing of someone close. And now you know why.